We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
So we are here today with Cat Clifford, who's a senior entrepreneurship writer at CNBC. Cat, welcome to Energy Impact.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I've been following your work, love it, and I'm super excited to learn about you. And actually, if we could maybe just start with how you got into journalism to begin with.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. I was reading the transcript of the person who came before me, the Wall Street Journal reporter. And, interestingly enough, for me, it was an accident too. I actually initially, my first career goals was to be a professional ballet dancer. So I spent the first 2 years of my life training to be, a ballet dancer. I failed in that, and really, then found a number of things that I, in college was trying a number of things that I ended up graduating and not wanting to do any of the things that I had sort of studied and tried with the internships and senior seminars and such. So anyway, I basically graduated, had no clue what I wanted to do, only knew the things I didn't want to do. And I really went to a career counselor, and she had me, fill out this form, like, what are the things that you're good at, that you're interested in? And so came to journalism that way, really started. I'm 39, so my first internship was at a newspaper. I did an internship, started at the New York Daily News, and worked my way up from there. But really, I backed in because I love writing. I'm very curious, always have been, and everything else that I had thought to do or thought I wanted to do either failed or I ended up trying and wasn't interested in. So
was there a specific learning from your ballet efforts? Was there a very specific takeaway when you decided not to do that anymore? Was there one kind of learning or even just way of being that was encapsulated from that experience that has carried through with you for the rest of your life?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that it wasn't that I stopped wanting to do that. I really just got to a point where I wasn't making the cut. I just wasn't good enough, So I was, it was, I say it was the first love of my life, and it was a heartbreak. So I definitely, would have wanted that to happen. I just wasn't good enough. So just to be clear, but I do think that training for that, and sort of, I was in a pre-professional training company in high school, and that the amount of time I spent dancing and really focused, and I think definitely gave me a discipline that I carry through my whole life. Gave me a willingness to fail and try again, and to really be powered by something that I'm passionate about, which is something, as an entrepreneurship reporter, I've heard from almost all the entrepreneurs that I've interviewed. So, at this point, I almost feel like it's it's not original to me, but it is, I mean, I'm not the only person that has felt that, but it is also true for me that, throughout, like when I was training ballet, I, several times had people say, listen, I don't know if you're going to make it. I don't know if you're good enough. You might want to consider, and several times until I like aged out and really, it was clear I wasn't going to make it, I continued trying. And so, just sort of like the persistence required to, be heard, to hear something is, you're not necessarily going to make it, and then to still keep going for a while, just because it was something that I was so passionate about.
Yeah. I'm wondering, when you started your career as a journalist, if there were also moments early on where you had to overcome hardship, either in finding a job or in, I don't know, even just like perfecting your skills. And you maybe looked back on some of the other challenges that you had gone through to help get through it.
Yeah, well, I guarantee if you were to talk to my editor even this morning, she would say I still have much improving to do. So, I don't ever consider it like something that, I have. I mean, I still consider myself constantly improving every day, every story. And, I'm constantly reading journalists and work that I admire, and that I think those journalists are more beautiful writers, have a better, I'm always reading the work of people who I think are better than I am. And, interesting too, like, my career, so I've basically been doing this for about 17 years, and the funnel of my time in journalism has narrowed as I've gone on. And what I mean by that is, I started as an intern at the Daily News, a daily newspaper, and from there basically was taking any work from anyone who would pay me. I was broke and needed a job. And so, actually through networking got an internship, or not an internship, a paid job, but basically a very like assistant job at CNN on the television side, and found myself sort of more interested in and more intrigued by the reporting I was doing actually for business news, which I was very surprised to find myself feeling that way. But it was because the thing about business news, even if it's a bit, wonky, or maybe people would say it's nerdy, or, even potentially dry, I always felt like if I was writing about oil or the price of oil or whatever it may be at, that time, I always felt like there was a through line of facts to follow. There was, if you follow the money, you're going to follow the story. And with other kinds of news, it could be a bit more sensational, perhaps, or you wouldn't know, there's like always multiple sides to a story kind of thing. Or it doesn't feel as grounded, as like important. But if you're following something that you can follow the money, you can follow the sincerity of the story, you can follow the bottom line. And so actually got into business news, went to CNN Money when CNN Money was like much smaller. It was very like early on. And then from my time at CNN Money, got into small business news. And then from small business news, which was, sort of like Main Street small business news, like, that kind of small business. But I really liked that, right? So then sort of narrowed into entrepreneurship, which I went to Entrepreneur, was there for a while, did many things there, came to CNBC and have recently been narrowing even further to sort of cover like innovation in the climate space. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm saying is like there's kind of been this progressive like narrowing through, as I have sort of focused more.
And is that true of other journalists as well, with your colleagues? Do they also do this narrowing down within a subdiscipline, or do people hop? How do you compare to some of your other colleagues?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that there are many, there's different there's, different kinds of journalists. And I definitely think there are some journalists who are more special or are more generalist, but I think that's probably more rare. I think if you're going to be like a generalist in like a large national media company, you might be covering breaking news, or, I'm sure that there's like editors at large who have purview to talk about, but generally, but that's quite a senior position if you're going to be sort of an editor at large talking about, but I think generally speaking, people tend to focus in an area, and I think for me, it makes me a better reporter. So as I've been able to, I think some of my reporting on, climate tech and climate innovation has been some of the best of my career. And I think that's because as I learn more, as I get more into a niche, I know the questions to ask. I know more about what's relevant. I know more about what's news, So I think, for me, and, yes, there may be some generalists out there who are very reputable at large media companies, but, I think generally speaking, you have people that get focused into beats. And that's not only how newsrooms are organized, but then also I think makes you like a better reporter, because as you know more, you can ask better questions,
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
which do you like best? Or maybe, I don't know if this is a fair comparison, it's not my field, but I imagine maybe there's like two sides to journalism. There's like the writing side where like you're trying to like take what you've learned and distill it and compose it and think about how to communicate and think about how people are going to interpret it. And then there's the investigating side where like you're going out and trying to like track down sources. Is that a fair characterization that there's like two different halves?
Absolutely. No, that's actually very accurate and very accurate in terms of like how I spend my time, how I organize my time.
And which do you like better? Which do you prefer?
Well, gosh, that's such a hard question. I think that, I think the reason I like being a journalist is because I like both of those. I mean, I definitely, and I think the reason, like, if I, it's interesting. I haven't really thought about my entire career very often until we had this conversation, or since the last time I had an interview for a job or something. But, when I started doing that, that like, chart, what's it called, like the flow chart, when I was after college trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and getting to the fact that writing was something that had always been something that I hadn't necessarily focused on because I was trying to be a ballet dancer, but that I had always found real satisfaction and clarity when I would tackle something with writing. So I think that for me, the writing is a key component. And actually, so one of my first paid jobs, as I mentioned, was at CNN in the television side. I was an assistant on the television bureau. And I realized pretty quickly, in addition to sort of working on business news, because I found a really kind of like solid thread to follow through the stories. But also I really like to write, and for me, writing is a process of organizing my thoughts. So for me, it's both. I love, I am constantly like, it is my entire, my like capacity, or my sort of time that I'm like a sponge and trying to learn and trying to always read more and listen to more. I love NPR. I listen to NPR a lot, or I listen to podcasts, or, I'm reading. I'm constantly, I think my like operating state is to be reading, learning, processing, sifting.
Yeah.
But then I find that the process of actually sitting down to write and, taking all of the pieces from interviews, research, all that kind of stuff, and putting it into one cohesive, you might be able to hear some music on the street there.
No, it's fine.
No, you can't hear it. Okay. Anyway, I'm here in New York. I can hear the street noise. So, the process of writing, though, is very important. And that's why actually it's also a very important back and forth with an editor, right? Because a lot of times I'm processing something and then I'm trying to put it in this document and I think I've got it clear, but then the process, the editor comes and says, well, this part's not really clear. You're not explaining this. So I find both parts very, very, very interesting and exciting. And, depending on the story, one is harder than the other, maybe, but I think they both really, for me, as someone who's really passionate about writing, in addition to like being creative and learning, both parts are really like satisfying and important parts of the process.
And do you have any like tips or tricks? Like, what do you do? Do you have like Post-it notes to organize things? Do you digitally?
Gosh. It's a good thing you can't see my desk. I am a list maker of the worst variety. I have lists of many different kinds. I have lists of priorities. They're like daily priorities, weekly priorities, monthly priorities. I have Post-its with gotta do this in the next hour. I also have several digital organization systems, like this is what I'm thinking about for this day, this is what I'm thinking about for this day. So I am absolutely very, very I'm always organizing. I think that's kind of part of being a journalist too. You're taking ideas and you're organizing them and you're sorting them and you're putting them in an organized process. And so, yes, I'm definitely always taking material, figuring out how to, organize it, thoughts, priorities, and taking it and sorting it in any number of lists. So absolutely.
And do you have any there's a certain time of the day that you're better, or do you like to write it in the evening or the morning, or does it not matter?
No, I definitely think that the best work I get done happens in the early hours of the day. I try to avoid having many meetings because that's when actually the best writing will happen.
And is that 6 a.m. or is that 10 a.m.?
No, I'm definitely not a 6 a.m. person. I wish I were, I desire to be those people who get up at 4 and they're the best work happens between 4:30 and 6:30. I'm like, who are you? I wish I were that cool. I'm not. But before, I would say before 1 or 2, when I the morning until 8 or 9 or whatever until 1 or 2. That's when my mind is going to be the best for writing. So I definitely most of the time will try and have my interviews and that kind of thing. It's 1 o'clock. Well, that was a good time. I try to have interviews 1 or 2, because I find that that's I can be more sort of creative and open for that. But the writing is a very sort of specific and kind of using a scalpel. And I don't mean to be graphic or anything, but it just is, that's when I need my brain to be sort of the most focused. So, yeah.
And sorry, before I let this go, because I'm also trying to become a better writer myself. I don't actually write anything, but do you have any other rituals? Do you have a cup of tea when you write, or anything else that I can?
Well, oh my gosh, I love that. I've definitely gone through waves where I've been a coffee person or a tea person. Right now I'm half and half. So I don't think I really have too many, I know people have all these habits and stuff. And I think the only thing for me, which I know my colleagues will know from when we were in the office, because it was a bit, I think I had sort of a bit of a monster reputation because I really need to be quiet. And that was a thing that when we were in the office, I would put earplugs in all the time. People thought I was crazy. But, I think, knowing that I have I know what the story is, or at least I know where I'm going, then, having the quiet time, in the morning. Yeah. And then I think the other thing, I really feel it's I feel like I'm still learning every day. So the idea that I have anything wise to share is I'm oh, I don't know if I have anything wise to share, but I will say that one thing I have learned, and this is because for 17 years, I paid my bills being a journalist and having to turn things in and various, amounts of deadline. Like sometimes when I was at CNN Money, the deadlines would be very short. You're basically doing kind of wire copy almost. And now they're a little bit longer, but still, I think one thing I've had to learn, and this is like a muscle, as you were saying about ballet and stuff, like training.
Yeah.
Now I do yoga, and it's like very similar kind of process is just start. I because I have to, like, this is how I pay my bills. Like, I have to write this piece, I have to file it, and I have to get it done in an X amount of time, And so one thing I think I have gotten good at is like just starting, and then knowing that, like, okay, it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's not even going to be close, but you got to start somewhere. You get the words on the page, and I know my editor will say I tend to overwrite. So I put too much, and it's always a matter. Almost every editor I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot of them over this year, it's like taking away, because I'm always like trying to put too much.
And what's that relationship like with the editor? Do you submit drafts and then they mark them up, or do you ever like have like a shared Google Doc in front of you and type together? What is it like?
Definitely not typing together. but I will say the editor relationship is different with every editor I've worked with.
Okay.
So I think that like anything I would share about my relationship with an editor now is going to be very different from a relationship I've had with, countless. I mean, I probably had like 25 or 30 editors in my career. And like, yeah, some of them, in certain instances, like when you're part of like a group that covers breaking news, I may have like 3 or 4 editors that cover things depending on who's free. In certain instances, like now I 95% of the time work with one editor. And also, so not only is it different for each editor, but it's also changed through my career because, when I first started, I was basically writing whatever the editor would tell me. I need you to write this story, like the oil price is at this, call analysts, find out why, like, or, the company made this announcement, you need to cover this. And now of course, there are times when, no matter who you are, the editor is going to say, I need you to write this. And I do. But most of the time now, and I feel very grateful for that creative freedom and, it's also a responsibility. It's both. It's a freedom and responsibility. I come up with the ideas. So it's all that sponge time, which is basically all the time I'm awake, I'm sponging, coming up with ideas, putting them on 17,000 lists. But then every morning I come to my editor and say, this is my priority. And that's another thing maybe you could say would be a tip as I try to like prioritize my day. Like these are the top 3 things that are the most important for today, so because there's a million things I have on my to-do list for story ideas, but I can't do them all. So I start today. What are my most important priorities for today? And, so I come to my editor with the story ideas. Sometimes, she'll say, I think that's too much. That's not good. It's not going to work for us. Da, 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 da. So there can be some back and forth there. But at this point in my career, I come with the ideas.
Cool. And okay, so then that leads to some of your recent ideas, getting into the climate and technology, entrepreneurship, that space, which is, you're getting more and more niche, but at the same time, this is one of the most urgent. I mean, you must have think, I'm like really hitting this at the right time, given everything that's happening in the world. Like this is probably one of the most important things to be writing about. Where did you decide to go from there? Did you just make a list of every type of technology and entrepreneur that's out there doing climate stuff?
Well, I appreciate your perspective, and that's my perspective too, that it is very timely. And that's sort of like one of the things which I try to always sort of be on, like, pushing the story, you know what I mean? Instead of catching up. Like, and so I know that there are people within, people who within CNBC and stuff who would say, I'm pushing this. And I am pushing that we, the climate coverage. I am pushing the climate innovation coverage. And there's a couple of reasons. I was thinking about this yesterday in preparation for our talk today. And I think, so I as I sort of said earlier, the funnel that got narrower throughout my career, going from general news to business news to small business news to entrepreneurship, which can include large companies, admittedly, but the entrepreneurship and innovation within the startup space is like a segment of small businesses. And then kind of getting into the innovation and the climate tech spaces I have recently. So I think that there's a combination of factors. Like, number one, I have covered entrepreneurship, startup, ecosystem, innovation. Like, I already kind of have the vocabulary of like, venture capitalists and startup rounds and da 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 da. Like, so I have that background. And so when I was sort of covering that space, the thing that felt exactly as you said, the most urgent to me, like my personal analysis, this is totally personal, not connected with, CNBC or my jobs or any employer. But in my head, when I think about the world, I consider that there are two existential crises facing the world right now. And I think one of them is climate change. And I think one of them is inequality of many different varieties. But so in my head, that's my sort of organization of like the most important things. Mm-hmm.
And I was just going to say, and both are somewhat energy related. I mean, we've gone around the world trying to, as part of our research institute, trying to figure out where we can have the most impact. And one of the things that we learned is just how inextricably energy access is tied to poverty 100%. And just like there's general human well-being. If you can't get them energy, they're going to be living in terrible conditions. I mean, not like poverty like we think of like in America, oh, there's this big poverty divide. I'm talking like dirt poor around the world just because they can't get energy.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And I think, we could spend like 3 afternoons talking just about these topics.
Maybe we should. Yeah.
I mean, listen, I'm happy to, so I knew that I had this background of like, spending 15 years plus writing about this space. And I knew that I had so what I brought to the table, and this is sort of like, my pitch to my bosses, like this is what I bring to the table. I bring to the table an experience covering entrepreneurship, startup, ecosystem, innovation. And then I believe that the climate change is this existential crisis, right? And so one of the things I started sort of naturally observing because of the area that I'm covering and my areas of like just observation and thinking is that there are some really, really amazing technologies being developed specifically in the innovation and entrepreneurship space to try and solve this problem. And I want to be clear, like, I don't think that like a high-tech company is going to solve climate change on its own. There's many, many, many components to addressing climate change. And I think that's really important to be clear about. But what I can add, and what I as a journalist can add to this story is talking about those high-tech innovation startups that are working in climate change space. And I think, the combination of it being the right time, plus my background, plus all the things that I'm learning, plus it just sort of being the right time to be on this story right now, is why I'm focused on this.
Amazing. So what's happening right now? Give us a taste of some of the articles that you've been writing.
Well, yeah. So actually, I just this morning put up a look. I've been working for a little bit now. Bits and pieces. I've been doing other stories too, but I did sort of within nuclear energy, there's fission, which most people would be aware of with the like nuclear reactors, the bombs, and then fusion, which is a little bit of a lesser known area, but especially in my research and working on this area, I've talked to some really incredibly inspiring entrepreneurs in this area. And I should say, one of the other reasons I'm interested in talking to these entrepreneurs is because sometimes when I'm reading about climate change elsewhere, I can get very depressed. And I feel like it's one of the places where there's actually some amount of momentum and progress and optimism and finding a solution.
Optimism, right. Yeah. It's not just people saying, oh, we need less human beings on planet Earth. They're saying, right. No, we are trying to make this in a wonderful, prosperous place for all people.
Yeah. And trying to find a solution and having a scientific base for that solution and stuff. So so I did another story about a fusion startup, Commonwealth Fusion Systems, a few months ago. Great, that was my first venture into fusion. And then the one I published this morning was TAE Technologies, which is one of the older fusion startups. I don't know their startup anymore. They've raised almost $1 billion, but they
For revenue, so it's still startup.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, there's always like, how do you define a startup? But innovation company, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to do with this story, because I think fusion at this point is so, most people, I mean, there's a subset of people who definitely are very in the know, but for most people, they don't know what it is. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know why it's hard. They don't know why it could help. So what I tried to do with this piece was do like a digital virtual tour of their facility, and the team was great. They gave me so much.
I love that. I was reading the article and I saw these giant pictures between every paragraph, and I'm like, this is awesome. But most articles aren't written that way. That are just so visual. Is that something that CNBC
This is an
does?
exception.
Okay.
Well, I know not all my stories are like that for sure, but this one in particular was so visual. Like I wanted to show, this is what fusion is. Yeah. This is what the technology looks like. This is why it's still not powering our, So that was something cool I did.
And then just logistically, did you have to work with like the digital team at your organization to like get all those pictures in there? Was that hard because it's not the same format? Okay.
I did that. So that's one of the things that, I think is a function of like, that I've definitely observed over the 17 years that I've been a journalist is like when I started, there was a department for everything. Like in the newspaper, there was and now I do so much. I'm like a one-man band. I mean, I didn't take the pictures. I didn't go to California. Yeah. They send me the pictures. I edit them, upload them, put them in our system. They sent some video clips too, where for example, some renderings, you can see the plasma being smushed together, slammed together to create this fusion football. All those videos clips, I put into our system. I did get some help from our video producer. She gave me some tips, how to do all that. But generally speaking, I'm putting all that together in our content management system.
Did you, when you first started writing about nuclear, both fission and fusion, did you notice that they're less covered in the mainstream media? And did you talk to any other environmental or science journalists who you thought maybe should have been writing about it but weren't, to try to figure out why they don't write more on these topics?
No, I haven't talked to other journalists about it yet.
But did you notice that it's not covered as much? I mean, I think it should be covered more. This is why we were so excited to talk to you.
Oh, cool. Well, it's one thing I will say that I noticed with one of the first stories I did. This one was when actually Bill Gates was on talking with Andrew Ross Sorkin on CNBC television. And he made a comment. He didn't talk directly to me. I wish he had. He talked to Andrew Ross Sorkin, but he made a comment about the political palatability or acceptance of nuclear energy and his thoughts on that. And so then I thought that was a really interesting jumping off point into a story on that. Yeah. And but one of the things about being a journalist, you have to get both sides of the view of the, and both sides of the perspective. And one thing that was a real kind of learning experience for me is that story, I got, very impassioned perspectives on both sides. And when I put it on I socialize all my stories, just sort of part of being a digital journalist. I put them on my Twitter, my LinkedIn, And when I put that one on Twitter, I got so many heated responses from both sides.
Tell me about them. What were some of the heated responses? And do you think that they're annoying, valid? Do you learn from them? I'm not on Twitter. I can't take the heat. It's a little too much for me. I think I got into one Twitter battle and I was like, I'm out. Mm-hmm. What did you get out of this type of feedback from Twitter?
Well, yeah, so that's a good question. So, I use Twitter as another source of information. You know how I said, like, I'm a sponge from the minute I wake up until I go to sleep. So for me, Twitter is a source of information. I have it very carefully curated. I follow people who are informed and both sides. I mean, for nuclear, for sure, I follow both sides of the story, but for all kinds of entrepreneurship, innovation, climate change, I try to follow both perspectives. So when I get that kind of heat, first of all, I've learned I don't take it personally. So that's number one.
You're braver than I am.
Well, I mean, it's the price of admission, right? You're going to be a journalist. You got to be able to but the other thing is I do read the comments. I do. Now, some of them are clearly coming from people who are just spewing their, mad about something else. This may not be even a nuclear story, but any story I do, I'm going to get comments from people that it's very clear they're just heated and letting off steam. And those I'm not going to respond to. But I very often get educated, informed, and maybe this is a hat tip to the CNBC readers. I get educated, informed perspectives from both sides, and it's helpful. It gives me story ideas, and on both sides. And I really do. I read them and I get story ideas from them, and it's important. One of the things that I really, really try is not to ever go into a story with my agenda. Like, I try and find the story because it's important, but then listen to both sides. And it's so I think Twitter can actually, for me, be LinkedIn. I also get comments on LinkedIn that are helpful. So both of those.
And LinkedIn, it's more professional, right? People aren't doing as heated comments, or do you still get, since you're a journalist and writing on topics that might be controversial, do you still get heated responses on LinkedIn as well?
I can think off the top of my head. I get some heated comments. I mean, I think I'm going to get heated comments no matter what, because I'm putting thoughts out there. Yeah. I think that based on some reading I've done about like what other reporters have had in terms of like really abrasive or unmanageable feedback, I'm not one of those. I do know certain reporters, they can speak for themselves. They have who, based on the area they're covering, definitely endure like a lot of like vitriol on Twitter and stuff. I feel like I don't get that. I feel like I get informed, thoughtful responses. And yeah, I mean, I can think of a story I did. I guess it was published like on Earth Day. So that was like last week, I think, about fossil fuel financing. Yeah. And that story idea actually came from another story I did like maybe a month ago, where I did sort of a quick hit on the numbers that came out of the report that the Rainforest Alliance Network and some other organizations put together on like how much banks are putting on fossil fuel financing. What's it called? Banking on crisis, or banking on climate crisis, or something. I can't remember the exact name of the report, but they do a very good job every year with this report. So I did that the headline number. And then actually it was a Twitter reader who gave me the idea, like, okay, so it's very clear like which banks are investing the most, but that's also because they're the biggest banks, right? So can you show us, can you look into who is increasing and decreasing their financing? And I spent quite a long time working on that story. So I mean, I think that it's helpful to like know what people are thinking, know what people are, readers are saying.
And then how long do you spend on a story? Like, I guess a story that's like 800, 1,000 words, 5 to 1,500 words or something. How much goes into it, and like what's the turnaround cycle on these?
Well, one of the things that I'm a firm believer, and I think, I can write very quickly. So writing like 1,000 words doesn't take me very long. It's not about what the word count is. It's about what you're trying to say. Yeah. And so I think that the word count is almost irrelevant. I think it was Mark Twain who said, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. Like, I mean, it's really, yeah, like, and I know my editor thinks I overwrite everything, but even to like write what I do, right, and to like present what I do, it almost doesn't matter how long it is. It's really about what you're saying. And like,
and do you have any stories that are like half on the shelf for like 8 months where it's like, I had an inkling of a story here, but I'm working on some other stuff and maybe I just want to see what other learnings come into my life. Are there stories like that out for you?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I have like priority lists that are like, so one of my priority lists, I have stories on my to-do list that I have been thinking about, or there's one story in particular, which I tried writing like a couple years ago, for a number of reasons. I got sort of to a bunch of roadblocks, but I still have it on my to-do list. So yes, there are definitely stories that I will chip away at like for a while, and then have other like shorter pieces coming in the background, that are published. I could publish sooner or faster. Some stories they take, you can write them in an hour. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really not how long 800 words takes. It's what you're saying.
And does all this accumulate into some broader thesis that you're developing? Because you get to see so many perspectives. You write all of these articles. And I'm not saying, oh, go write a book or anything, maybe you do, but I guess I'm wondering, do you get something out of this, just the total accumulation of knowledge that you've pulled together that amounts to a different type of writing, where it's not so much just like reporting on this, reporting this, but you've got like some real like original idea that has like come from your experience. Does that happen?
I sure hope so. If I feel like that's what I should be doing. And I think there are, as I sort of mentioned, that some of like actually even where I focus my energy has to do with some of those theses that I think about, like that I think climate change is the existential crisis of our generation. And that's sort of like why I'm focusing on this. I definitely feel that, I mean, all of that being said, my job as a journalist is not to like give my point of view. I can.
But that's what I'm wondering. But you're going to have a very valuable point of view from all of the journalism work that you do. What is the right forum for you then to project your point of view?
Well, I think I at this point in my career, I'm not an opinion. I don't write opinions. I don't write op-eds. There are people who are very senior journalists who do that. But at this point, the thing I could say is that the research and writing that I do informs what story I'm going to cover. It informs my feeling that this is an important area to be covering. But at this point, it is absolutely not my place to be. Now, if I were to leave journalism, then I could take some of my opinions and observations and expertise, and I could give my opinions. But as long as I am at CNBC, I am a journalist, I can use my collective knowledge to inform areas that need further clarification, that ought to be investigated. But it's not my place to be giving opinions. Not now. Maybe sometime, but I don't know. But not now.
I mean, I personally, based on everything that you're writing in article form, I mean, I'll just put it out there. I think I'd love to see a book from you sometime.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you. I mean, maybe some publisher will watch this and have the same thoughts. So that'd be great.
So tell me, you said a lot of things that you like to do. You're just a sponge, that you read a lot of other people's work and you listen to podcasts. Can you tell me, who do you listen to? Who inspires you? Other people in the sector or just more broadly?
Yeah. So I as much as I am a writer and I like to, I process my thoughts by writing. I also love I love audio. I love listening. So everyone I work with knows I'll always say, oh, I heard this on NPR. So I listen to podcasts. I listen to NPR. I listen to All Things Considered almost every day to sort of like get an overview, but of like sort of what happened that day or whatever. Like usually if I'm doing something else, that's why I listen to, the audio, because I can be doing that while I'm cooking and stuff like that. But then in terms of like in the space that I've been covering, where I'm really trying to like build up my my knowledge. I read a lot. I mean, I don't know, their competition, I don't know, it's not really competition necessarily, I guess. I mean, I feel like that we just need more
Yeah.
climate coverage. I read what Bloomberg Green does a lot. They're a really outstanding leader in terms of like as a major outlet that has put an entire team behind this space. I read Bloomberg Green. I read the Washington Post. I read their climate coverage. I read the New York Times climate coverage.
Are there any specific journalists that you like over there that you want to give a shout out to, that you think that their work is just awesome and that you learn from?
Oh my gosh, like all of them. I mean, the other one I was going to say is that Atlantic, the guy who writes the Atlantic climate newsletter, and I forget his name right now. Yeah, I'll look it up later. But I read the Atlantic. I can't remember what his name is. Anyway, but I read the Atlantic climate newsletter also. Another thing that I do is I get the Climate Nexus newsletter. So that is a really great way to like, what Climate Nexus does is they pull together like all of the main stories, prioritize them, and give you links to all the places that are writing about that. So I read the Climate Nexus newsletter like every day. That's very helpful. I also like, yeah, I don't know, what else do I read? I mean, I try and read so much, like every day, I'm always just like.
Do you ever read fiction? Is there some component to fiction that helps you think more creatively in some way or another?
I love fiction. I have not read very much fiction recently, and that is definitely like a bummer or a disappointment or whatever. My mother is a voracious reader, and she reads so much fiction. And it's not that I don't like to read fiction. I just feel like right now at this point in my life, like I literally, from the time I wake up until I go to bed, even if I'm not like at my desk that entire time, I feel like I'm just constantly trying to like really educate myself in this space. So I'm not really reading a lot of fiction right now, which is regrettable. And I know my mom is gonna like, wish I had a better answer, but that's the truth. Just like right now.
I'm in the same place. Like I remember as a kid, I used to read so much fiction, just get lost in these books. And it was like just the greatest, you find yourself in another world. It's the greatest entertainment ever. And now as an adult, I think that I still read a lot, but it's nonfiction. And partially because the world is so interesting on its own, but it's not the same as, just kind of like, getting lost in someone else's universe, really.
What I am reading right now, and this is not fiction, and so I can pick it up in little bits, is I'm reading, and this is, again, maybe going to sound like morbid or something, but I really definitely do not think it is. I'm reading The Lost Art of Dying. I'm almost done with that. It's about the Ars Moriendi, and it's written by a professor at Columbia, I think. She's a doctor, and sort of what our culture has lost by sort of like not being connected with the process of dying. And so, I mean, I'm sort of like constantly like thinking about our place in the universe. And I've been watching also a lot of documentaries of late about sort of, the time since the Big Bang, and about space. I'm like obsessed with things like volcanoes, the black holes. I think a lot about these kinds of things too, and I think maybe you could say that the through line there is like trying to figure out our I'm 39. Maybe that has something to do with it too, like trying to figure out our place in the world, and also with all the climate change, like trying to figure out like our responsibility, our place, our and sometimes honestly, like it's just very comforting to know how insignificant we are.
Yeah.
That our entire time on Earth is like the blink of an eye compared to like when the planet started. And some of that is just because I'm curious and because I'm trying to figure out where we sit. And it also calms me down to know that like none of this, everything is sort of like so small in the grand scheme of things.
It's so true. God, there's this expression, I'm going to butcher it, but something about like, how a fish doesn't actually know that it's in water, but like us from outside that perspective, like we know more about its own environment than it does, not just because they have small brains, but because like we're outside the water. And it's almost like that reminded me when you were talking about space and helping us conceptualize like our place and our responsibility to this planet, just by thinking about the broader thing, it almost gives us that outside perspective looking in to better understand the environment that we're actually situated in.
Totally. So I would say that like in terms of external, like non like work, like reading about like innovation tech and that kind of stuff, I would say, I do like to read sort of like, philosophical kind of things about like, about death, although that sounds morbid, but just like our humanity. And then I'm also like very fascinated with sort of the big picture of our Earth's history and space and just realizing how small we all are.
Yeah. As we wrap up, maybe you could just kind of give us a peek into what's coming next for you. What are some articles that you can sneak preview that are going to come out in the next month or two?
Cool. I would love to. So actually one of the most exciting interviews I had recently, I interviewed the founders. I don't mean to be so promotional about it, but I
go for it
right here. So I interviewed the Christiana Figueres. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And Tom Rivet Karnak. They're the two UN people who were largely responsible for the Paris Climate Accord in 2015.
Cool.
They also created the co-created the Climate Pledge, which is Amazon's initiative or effort to, they co-created the Climate Pledge, which is coming together to get companies on board with, getting up to speed with decarbonization. And as CNBC in particular, I really think that like what companies need to do in the next decade is critical and fascinating, and seeing Amazon starting that trend and many other companies, and they definitely have more work to do. There's many complicated ripples to that story, but about how companies are going to be, pushing that narrative is very fascinating for me and for CNBC. And so I have a couple of stories coming from them. I interviewed them. It was like very fascinating to me. I was glad to have a little bit of their time. And so I have a couple of stories already in edit and some more coming. And so I'm excited about those.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I would love to have you back. And like anytime that you come out with a cool article and you just want to chat about the content, I think it would be a blast to have you as a regular on our program. So.
Oh my gosh, I'm honored. Well, it's so funny because I always feel so like I'm the one doing the interviewing. Like I'm always the one who's asking the questions. So I'm like, what do you want to ask me about? But I definitely, and this is the kind of stuff that I'm like thinking and talking and all about all the time right now. So I'm happy to anytime that you want. Sure.
Awesome. Well, Cat Clifford, that's all, folks.
All right. Thank you.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.